The weight of a handshake, the sky over Carthel Prime was the color of burnished copper, heavy with slow-moving clouds that pressed down on the capital like a held breath. The alien city beneath them rose in layered terraces of crystal and stone, each structure grown rather than built, shaped by centuries of patient design. To the Cartheli, this world was a triumph of control, climate regulated, tectonic stabilized, ecosystems balanced to the decimal. To them, chaos was a failure, which was why they were deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with the human standing alone in the center of the Grand Convergence Hall. Ambassador Mara Ellison adjusted the cuffs of her plain black jacket and resisted the urge to fidget. The hall was enormous, its ceiling arching so high it vanished into haze, supported by living columns that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light. Thousands of alien delegates watched from their tiered platforms, their multifaceted eyes fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity, caution, and something dangerously close to fear. She smiled anyway. The Cartheli speaker, a towering being of layered chitin and soft glowing veins, addressed the hall. Its voice resonated directly in the minds of everyone present, perfectly modulated and utterly emotionless. "Human ambassador," it intoned, "you stand before us at a moment of unprecedented risk. Your species has been classified as statistically volatile." Mara nodded. "We get that a lot." A ripple of unease moved through the delegates. Humor, unprompted and unnecessary, was not part of Cartheli diplomatic protocol. The speaker continued. "Your history indicates extreme environmental damage, internal conflict, and repeated near-extinction events. And yet," the creature paused, a gesture heavy with meaning, "you persist, you adapt, you advance." Mara clasped her hands behind her back. "We're stubborn like that." The speaker's mandibles clicked softly, an alien sign of dissonance. "Explain." So she did. She spoke of Earth, not as a pristine world but as a hard one, of storms and earthquakes and plagues, of mistakes made on a planetary scale and the long, painful process of learning from them. She spoke of ingenuity born not from perfection but from desperation, of people who rebuilt cities after disasters, who shared food when there wasn't enough, who reached for the stars not because it was safe, but because it was there. As she spoke, the hall grew quieter. "You fear us," Mara said gently, meeting the speaker's many eyes, "because we're unpredictable, because we don't always do things the right way. But that's exactly why we're here." The speaker considered her words. "Your presence has already disrupted 3 probabilistic models." She smiled wider. "That means we're being ourselves." Silence stretched. Then slowly the speaker extended one massive armored limb. "A symbolic gesture has been proposed," it said. "A handshake." Mara stepped forward without hesitation and placed her small, human hand against the alien limb. The contact was warm, solid, real. Across the hall, systems recalculated. Models collapsed. New possibilities emerged. For the first time in recorded Cartheli history, uncertainty was no longer viewed as a flaw. It was an asset. And as the copper sky outside finally broke into rain, an unplanned storm, beautiful in its imperfection, the galaxy took its first step toward understanding humanity, not as a threat, but as a force that endured. The rain was not part of the schedule. On Carthel Prime, nothing ever was, unless it had been approved by a committee, modeled across centuries, and simulated until all risk was bled out of it. The sudden downpour streaking across the copper sky sent ripples of unease through the city's atmospheric oversight systems. Drones lifted from their nests along the terraces, sensors flaring as they attempted to diagnose a phenomenon that, by all official records, should not be happening. Ambassador Mara Ellison noticed immediately. She felt it on her face as she stepped out onto the open balcony beyond the grand convergence hall. Cool, clean, honest. Rain had a way of reminding her of home, of standing barefoot on cracked pavement as a kid, watching summer storms roll in despite every forecast insisting otherwise. Behind her, the Carthely speaker paused at the threshold, its attendants frozen in anxious formation. This precipitation event, the speaker said carefully, was not authorized. Mara laughed softly. Neither were half the things that ever mattered. The speaker did not understand the statement, but it logged it anyway. Over the following cycles, the effects of that single handshake began to propagate. At first it was subtle, a minor recalibration here, a loosened protocol there. The Carthely Data Councils, vast collectives of minds dedicated to predictive certainty, found themselves encountering increasing error margins whenever humans were involved. Trade negotiations concluded faster, but with fewer predefined outcomes. Joint research projects veered into unexpected applications. Even the language matrices began adapting, incorporating human idioms that had no direct logical equivalent. Close enough. We'll figure it out. Good enough for now. These phrases horrified the purists. One counselor, an elder analyst whose entire existence had been devoted to reducing uncertainty, finally confronted Mara during a private audience. "Your species is inefficient," it accused. "You accept loss. You tolerate ambiguity. You proceed without complete data." Mara sipped from her mug. Yes, she had insisted on bringing coffee to an alien world obsessed with optimization, and met its gaze. "Because waiting for perfect data means you never act," she said. "And sometimes, acting matters more than being right." The analyst recoiled as if struck. Yet weeks later, when a tectonic anomaly threatened one of the outer habitation rings, something their models insisted was impossible, it was a human engineer who volunteered first. No simulations, no centuries-long planning cycles, just boots, sensors, and a gut feeling that something didn't add up. They were right. The fix was inelegant, temporary, borderline reckless by Carthely standards. It worked. Word spread, not just across Carthel Prime, but outward, through trade routes, diplomatic channels, and the quiet, gossip-filled networks that bound the galaxy together. Stories accumulated. Humans who walked into disaster zones with a shrug and came out smiling. Humans who argued fiercely among themselves, yet closed ranks the moment someone else was in trouble. Humans who treated survival not as a calculation, but as a promise. Eventually, the speaker requested another meeting. "You have altered us," it said without accusation. "Our models no longer seek absolute certainty." Mara leaned back in her chair. "Welcome to the club." The speaker hesitated. "There is concern. If unpredictability is embraced, failure becomes possible." Mara's expression softened. Failure was always possible. "You just pretended it was." Outside, the rain had stopped. The copper sky cracked open, light spilling through in colors no Carthely algorithm had ever named. The speaker watched it in silence. "For the first time," it said slowly, "we do not know what comes next." Mara smiled, warm and unapologetically human. "Yeah," she said, "that's usually where the good stuff starts." And somewhere, far beyond Carthel Prime, other civilizations began quietly revising their files on humanity, not as a variable to be contained, but as a reminder that survival was not about control. It was about courage. The consequences did not arrive with explosions or declarations of war. They arrived quietly through invitations. 3 cycles after the rain, a Carthely Junior Systems architect requested permission to observe a human decision-making session, not to model it, not to abstract it, To watch it happen in real time with all its inefficiencies intact. Mara approved it without hesitation. The session itself was almost painfully ordinary by human standards. A small room, a shared table, a half-dozen humans arguing, not angrily but energetically, over a supply chain reroute that had gone sideways. There were raised voices, overlapping ideas, bad jokes, coffee spills, and one moment where someone said, "Okay, that's dumb, wait, no, it's dumb, but it might work." The Cartheli observer recorded everything, especially the laughter. Later, when asked what conclusion had been reached, the observer struggled to answer. There was no single optimal solution, it reported. There were several acceptable ones. The humans selected one based on time pressure, morale, and instinct. That last word caused a stir. Instinct was not measurable. It could not be graphed or predicted. It did not emerge from data alone. And yet, when a trade convoy was threatened by a stellar anomaly no one had ever encountered before, it was a human freighter captain who rerouted on instinct, ignoring the approved safe lanes, trusting a pattern that felt wrong in a familiar way. The convoy survived. The anomaly did not. Galactic observers began to notice a pattern that defied classification. Humans did not eliminate chaos. They negotiated with it. Mara found herself busier than ever. Requests flooded in, not just for treaties or alliances, but for advisors, human advisors. People who could sit in a room full of blinking lights and impossible equations and say things like, "Okay, let's breathe for a second," or "What's the worst that actually happens if we try this?" Some Cartheli resisted, deeply. One such elder confronted Mara during a council recess, its voice sharp with controlled agitation. "You are teaching us to gamble with existence." Mara met its gaze evenly. "No, we're teaching you that you've been gambling all along. You just didn't want to admit it." The elder recoiled, but it did not argue further, because even it had seen the reports. Human teams operating on worlds deemed marginal were not just surviving, they were thriving. They planted crops in unstable soil. They built shelters that bent instead of breaking. They formed communities in places where long-term projections insisted none could exist. When asked why they stayed, the answers varied. Someone had to. It's not as bad as it looks. Feels like home, honestly. That last one confused everyone. Mara, however, understood it perfectly. One evening, long after official duties had ended, the speaker joined her again on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights below shimmered against the dark, imperfect sky. "You do not seek mastery over your environment," the speaker observed. "You coexist with its hostility." Mara leaned on the railing. "We don't always win, but we don't quit either." The speaker was silent for a long time. "Our civilization was built on the premise that survival required control," it said at last. "Yours appears to be built on something else." Mara thought of Earth, of floodplains and fault lines, of people who rebuilt anyway, of hands reaching out after disasters, muddy and bleeding and unafraid. "Connection," she said, "hope, and a really annoying refusal to give up." The speaker inclined its massive head, a gesture of respect now, not calculation. "Then the galaxy may be changing," it said, "because we are beginning to understand that certainty is not strength." Mara smiled, watching another unscheduled cloud drift across the stars. "No," she agreed, "but resilience is." And far beyond Carthel Prime, in council chambers and research stations and half-forgotten outposts, one quiet realization took hold. Humanity did not promise a safer future. Humanity promised a future that kept going, no matter what. The first crisis that tested this new understanding did not begin on Carthel Prime. It began on a border world no one had bothered to name properly, Only a catalog designation and a footnote, marginal, unstable, not recommended for long-term habitation. Humans called it Hearth 47 within a week of landing. When the seismic alarms triggered, the Carthely Oversight Council reacted exactly as it always had. Evacuation protocols initiated. Probability curves spiked red. Loss projections cascaded through the network. The planet's crust was undergoing a resonance shift, rare, poorly understood, and catastrophically inconvenient. By Carthely standards, the solution was obvious. Withdraw. Humanity's response was different. Mara Ellison was in the middle of a routine briefing when the alert reached her terminal. She skimmed the data once, frowned, then opened a channel marked Local Command Hearth 47. The response came with background noise, wind, machinery, someone arguing about generators. "Ellison here," Mara said. "Status." A human voice answered, calm but busy. "Yeah, we see it. Ground's angry today." "You're supposed to be evacuating," a Carthely liaison cut in sharply, unable to stop itself. There was a pause. Then the human replied, "We will, just not yet." Mara closed her eyes for half a second, then smiled. "Explain," she said. "We've got people in shelters already," the voice continued. "Structures are flex-housed, remember, built for shake. If we leave now, we lose the infrastructure, and the people don't want to abandon it. Not when there's a chance we can ride it out." Ride it out. That phrase made 3 Carthely analysts simultaneously flag the channel for risk assessment. The speaker was brought in within minutes. "You are choosing exposure over certainty," it said, voice tight with alarm. Mara leaned forward. "They're choosing commitment." The tremors intensified. On Hearth 47, humans worked through the night. They reinforced joints with materials never intended for that purpose. They rerouted power manually. They sang to keep timing during synchronized adjustments. When a support tower buckled, 3 people ran toward it instead of away, stabilizing it long enough for others to anchor it properly. They were afraid. They acted anyway. When the resonance finally passed, the damage was extensive but survivable. No lives lost. The settlement stood, scarred but intact. The Carthely councils were silent for an entire cycle. Then the reports began to circulate. Not just data, testimony. Accounts of humans refusing evacuation orders not out of ignorance, but out of responsibility. Of communities choosing shared risk over isolated safety. Of people who understood that survival was not just about not dying, but about not abandoning each other. Mara was summoned once more before the speaker. "This behavior contradicts every model we possess," it admitted. "You accept danger knowingly." Mara nodded. "We don't like it. But we accept that some things are worth it. Even failure." She met its gaze steadily. "Especially failure, because failure isn't the end for us, it's a lesson." The speaker was quiet for a long time. "Then your species does not measure success as we do." "No," Mara said softly. "We measure it by who's still standing together afterward." Across the galaxy, policies began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but evacuation protocols gained clauses. Models gained margins labeled human factors. And in a move that shocked the academic cores, a new field of study was approved. Applied uncertainty management, colloquial designation, human methods. Mara received the notice while watching another unscheduled sunset bleed across the sky of Carthel Prime. She smiled, tired but proud. Humanity had not conquered the stars. It had done something far stranger and far more dangerous. It had taught the galaxy that perfection was fragile, but perseverance could bend without breaking. And the universe, vast and indifferent as it was, seemed, just slightly, to bend back. Continue, the first official use of human methods occurred sooner than anyone expected. A relay station on the edge of known space, older than most current civilizations, stitched together from generations of incremental upgrades, began to fail. Not catastrophically, not cleanly. It was the worst kind of problem, cascading, partial, contradictory. Sensors disagreed with each other. Systems reported green while physically melting. Predictive models forked into thousands of equally plausible failures, none dominant enough to justify decisive action. The Carthely councils did what they always did. They convened, and while they debated, the station continued to decay. That was when a junior coordinator, recently rotated through a human exchange program, made a decision that would have been unthinkable a cycle earlier. They pinged Ambassador Mara Ellison directly. "Is this an emergency?" Mara asked, glancing at the incoming data stream. "Yes," the coordinator replied. "But we cannot agree on which kind." Mara exhaled slowly. "All right, patch me in." Within minutes, a mixed-species task group assembled. The Carthely analysts began projecting failure trees and mitigation hierarchies. The humans skimmed the same data and started asking different questions. What's the one thing we absolutely can't lose? Which system failing first gives us the most time? Who's physically closest and can get hands on the problem? The analysts bristled. "These questions lack precision," one objected. "We must identify the optimal." "There is no optimal," a human cut in, not unkindly. "There's just good enough to keep people alive and too late. Let's aim for the first one." Silence followed, then action. Teams were dispatched before consensus was reached. Manual overrides engaged. Redundant systems were cannibalized to prop up critical ones. A human tech crawled into a maintenance shaft with failing gravity and shouted status updates while laughing nervously the entire time. The station survived. Barely. When the crisis ended, the official report was messy. No clean solution path. No single decision point. Just a chain of human judgments, improvised fixes, and calculated risks taken without complete information. And yet the outcome was undeniable. Lives saved, infrastructure preserved, time bought. The councils did not celebrate, they recalibrated. Mara noticed the change not in announcements but in tone. Meetings grew shorter. Questions became more practical. Phrases like acceptable risk and iterative response crept into official language. Humans were no longer invited as curiosities or controlled variables. They were invited as partners. One night, long after the relay station incident, Mara received a private message from the speaker. "Walk with me," it requested. They met beneath the living arches of a public terrace, where Carthely citizens gathered to observe the stars. The speaker moved more slowly than usual. "Our people are unsettled," it admitted. "Certainty has been our shield for millennia. You have shown us that it was incomplete." Mara folded her arms against the cool air. "Change always is. There is fear," the speaker continued, "that by adopting your methods we invite chaos." Mara looked out at the stars, at the vast, uncaring dark humanity had always faced with a mixture of terror and awe. "We don't invite it," she said. "Chaos shows up whether you want it or not. We just don't freeze when it does." The speaker considered this. "Your species acts as though the universe is not something to be solved," it said, "but something to be endured." Mara smiled faintly. "Yeah, and sometimes even enjoyed." The speaker let that sit. Across the galaxy, more civilizations took notice. Some cautiously, some eagerly, some with deep suspicion. But all of them began to understand one thing. Humans were not dangerous because they were unpredictable. Humans were dangerous because they were adaptable. They could lose everything and still keep moving. They could fail and still try again. They could stand in the ruins of their own mistakes and decide, collectively, that tomorrow was still worth building. And that realization changed the balance of the galaxy forever, not with fleets or weapons or dominion, but with a simple, stubborn truth humanity had carried since its earliest days under uncertain skies. No matter how bad it gets, we figure it out. The moment humanity truly understood what it had become to the galaxy did not come from a council decree or a formal alliance. It came from a warning. A signal burst out of the dark between arms of the spiral, ancient, fractured, and wrong. Not a weapon signature, not a distress call in any known format. It was noise layered with intent, entropy shaped into something deliberate. Entire sensor arrays failed trying to parse it. Prediction engines spiraled into recursive loops and shut themselves down rather than return impossible answers. Civilizations panicked. Some sealed their borders. Others powered down long-range systems entirely, hoping ignorance might serve as armor. The Cartheli councils ran simulations until their processing lattices overheated. Every model ended the same way: insufficient data. The galaxy had finally encountered something it could not quantify. Mara Ellison was awakened mid-cycle by an emergency channel override. She listened in silence as analysts spoke over one another, voices tight, controlled, afraid. "Say it plainly," she finally said. The speaker complied. "We do not know what is coming," it said, "and for the first time we do not know how to prepare." Mara sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "All right," she said, "then we do this the human way." That phrase, the human way, had once been a quiet joke. Now it triggered action. Humans were pulled from trade missions, research outposts, and marginal colonies, not because they had answers, but because they were accustomed to operating without them. Mixed crews formed organically, humans slotting themselves into gaps where certainty failed. They asked uncomfortable questions. They ran experiments that didn't promise clean results. They argued, disagreed, adjusted, tried again. Someone coined a phrase that spread faster than any official directive. Don't wait for the universe to make sense. Make it blink first. The signal intensified. It disrupted hyperspace lanes, but not predictably. It collapsed stars, but only after decades of warning signs most civilizations had learned to ignore as statistical noise. It reacted to observation, shifting patterns when studied too closely. The galaxy hesitated. Humans did not. A human-led task group proposed something no council algorithm would ever approve: direct interaction. Not an attack, not a containment field, a response, messy, imperfect, deliberately visible. They broadcast back, not with power, with pattern. Layered signals built from human history, mathematical constants wrapped in music, noise interspersed with silence, failure points deliberately left unresolved. The message was not efficient. It was not elegant. It was unmistakably alive. When the signal reacted, hesitating, changing, mirroring, the galaxy held its breath. Contact did not bring peace. But it brought time. Enough time to adapt evacuation strategies. Enough time to reinforce vulnerable systems. Enough time to learn that the thing in the dark was not a force of destruction, but a process, an emergent phenomenon, unstable, dangerous, and responsive to engagement. It could not be solved, but it could be managed. Afterward, when the immediate danger receded into long-term vigilance, the councils convened one last time to assess what had happened. The conclusion was simple and quietly terrifying. If humans had not been present, the galaxy would have waited for certainty. And waiting would have been the end. Mara stood once more on the balcony of Carthel Prime, older now, lines earned rather than hidden. The speaker joined her, its presence familiar in a way that would have been impossible cycles ago. "You face the unknown," it said, "without guarantees." Mara nodded. "That's kind of our thing. You risked failure on a galactic scale." She smiled faintly. "We've done it before, smaller scale, same idea." The speaker looked out at the stars, still vast, still dangerous, still beautifully indifferent. "Then humanity is not the galaxy's shield," it said slowly. Mara considered that. "No," she agreed. "We're more like its momentum." The speaker inclined its head, and across the galaxy, in worlds once ruled by perfect forecasts and fear of deviation, a new truth settled in. The universe was not kind. It was not fair. It was not predictable. But as long as humans were part of the equation, it would never face the dark standing still.